Genesis chapter 15 is a pivotal moment in the story of Abraham and God's covenant with him. It holds a timeless message that resonates deeply with us today, urging us to trust in God's promises even when the road ahead seems uncertain or filled with obstacles. In this chapter, we see a raw, vulnerable Abraham, filled with doubts and fears, yet standing firm in his faith and ultimately receiving God's assurance of his unfailing commitment. In the early verses of Genesis 15, we find Abraham, then known as Abram, struggling with doubt. He has left his homeland, his family, and his comfort zone to follow the call of God. God had promised Abraham that his descendants would become a great nation, but at this point in his life, Abraham has no children. His wife, Sarai, is barren, and his age is advancing. He is filled with questions. How will God's promises come true? How will he ever become the father of a great nation when he has no heirs? God meets Abraham in this moment of doubt and assures him, saying, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." Genesis 15:1. These words are not just a simple statement, they are a powerful reminder that God is with him. Despite the uncertainty that surrounds Abraham's life, God is promising his protection and a future filled with blessings. These words are meant to inspire us as well, reminding us that even in our darkest moments of doubt, God's presence and his promises remain steadfast. But Abraham, being human, still struggles to fully grasp the enormity of God's promise. He questions, "O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?" Genesis 15:2. Abraham's question is filled with a mixture of fear and longing. He wants to believe in God's promises, but the reality of his situation seems to contradict them. He is at the end of his rope, unsure of how to continue forward. It is at this critical point that God responds with a revelation that would change Abraham's life forever. God takes Abraham outside and shows him the stars in the sky, saying, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be." Genesis 15:5. This is not just a metaphorical statement, it is a promise that transcends Abraham's current circumstances. God is telling him that, despite the impossibility of the situation, he has a plan that is far greater than Abraham could ever imagine. The promise of countless descendants is a symbol of God's infinite power and his ability to do the impossible. This moment is one of great significance for Abraham, and it serves as a pivotal turning point in his journey of faith. God does not just offer empty words, he provides a tangible sign of his commitment. Abraham, in that moment, chooses to believe God. The Bible tells us that Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Genesis 15:6. This verse is foundational to our understanding of faith. Abraham's belief in God's promises, despite the overwhelming odds, is counted as righteousness. This is a reminder to us that our faith, our trust in God, even when we cannot see the full picture, is what pleases God. It is not our perfection or our ability to understand every detail that earns his favor, it is our willingness to trust in his goodness and his plan. As the chapter progresses, God makes a covenant with Abraham. He promises to give Abraham the land that he had walked upon, stretching from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. Genesis 15:18. This covenant is not based on anything Abraham has done, it is based solely on God's grace and his unchanging nature. Abraham does not have to earn this promise, but instead, he is invited to receive it. By faith, God's covenant with Abraham serves as a reminder that our relationship with God is not one of mere obligation, but one of grace. We are called not to earn God's love or favor, but to simply receive it with open hearts, trusting in his good and perfect will. But God does not stop there. He gives Abraham a prophetic vision of the future, revealing that his descendants will endure hardship and oppression before ultimately receiving the land promised to them. Genesis 15:13-14. This prophecy is not a sign of abandonment, but rather a reminder that the road to God's promises is not always easy. There will be trials, suffering, and difficulties along the way. Yet, God's promises remain unchanged. His faithfulness endures through every season of life, and even in the midst of hardship, his presence is with us. The message of Genesis 15 is one of hope and assurance. It speaks to the heart of every person who has ever faced uncertainty, fear, or doubt. Abraham's story is not just his own, it is our story as well. We all face moments of doubt, moments when God's promises seem distant or impossible. But in those moments, we must remember the words of God, "Do not be afraid. I am your shield, I am your very great reward." God's promises are not limited by our circumstances. He is greater than our fears and more powerful than the obstacles that stand in our way. Abraham's journey of faith is an example for us all. Just as he trusted in God's promises, we too are called to trust, even when the path ahead is unclear. This trust is not passive, it is an active choice to rely on God's character, to believe in His goodness, and to rest in His sovereignty. When we face challenges, we can take comfort in the fact that God has already gone before us, preparing a way for us to walk in His promises. Just as Abraham walked by faith, so must we. In times of fear and uncertainty, we must remember that God is our shield. He protects us from the storms of life, from the doubts that seek to consume us, and from the lies that try to convince us that His promises are not true. When we are tempted to fear the unknown, we can find peace in the fact that God has already secured our future. His promises are not based on our ability to understand, but on His unchanging faithfulness. As we continue to journey through life, it is important to remember that we are not alone. Just as God made a covenant with Abraham, He has made a covenant with us. Through Jesus Christ, we have been brought into a new covenant, a covenant of grace and peace. We are heirs to the promises of God, not because of our own worthiness, but because of His great love for us. And just as God called Abraham to trust Him, He calls us to trust Him with our lives. The story of Abraham in Genesis 15 is a reminder that, no matter what we face, God's promises remain true. Even in the darkest moments, when the future seems uncertain and the path ahead is filled with obstacles, God is with us. He is our shield, our protector, and our great reward. We must hold fast to His promises, trusting that He will fulfill what He has spoken over our lives. As we reflect on the lessons of Genesis 15, we are reminded of the importance of faith. Faith is not merely believing in God's existence, it is trusting in His promises, even when we cannot see how they will come to pass. It is a deep, unwavering belief that God is who He says He is and that He will do what He has promised to do. This faith is what pleases God, and it is through faith that we inherit the promises of God. In our own lives, we may find ourselves at moments of doubt, unsure of how to move forward. But just as God reassured Abraham, He reassures us today. His promises are not based on our circumstances, they are based on His unchanging nature. When we choose to believe, we step into the fullness of His plan for our lives. We may not see the entire picture, but we can trust that God is working behind the scenes, weaving together every detail of our lives for His glory and our good. So, if you are facing a moment of fear or uncertainty, remember the words of God to Abraham, "Do not be afraid. I am your shield, your very great reward." Trust in the promises of God, even when the road ahead is unclear. Believe that, no matter the obstacles, God is faithful, and His promises will come to pass. If you were encouraged by this message and want to hear more about the truths of God's Word, make sure to subscribe to my channel, Shining Truths. Stay connected, and together, let's continue to dive into the rich promises of God and walk by faith, trusting that He will guide us through every trial and bring us into the fullness of His purpose for our lives.